Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Nahmaduhu wa nusalli ala rasulihil kareem. So now we're moving on to the final source, semi-source of tafsir, which is al-Israeeliyyaat. What is Israeeliyyaat? So first we discuss Usool of Tafseer, the tarikh, the history of Usool of Tafseer. Then we discuss the sources of tafsir. Quran being a source, Sunnah being a source, Aqwalus Salaf being a source, Lugha being a source, and Israeeliyyaat being a source. Well, Israeeliyyaat being a source is what we want to discuss today. So, before we get into this discussion, what is meant by Israeeliyyaat? So, Israeeliyyaat is anything which the ulama have taken from the Banu Israel, who are the Yahud, because obviously Israel, children of Yaqub alayhi salatu wasalam, which are the Jews, and the Nasara, which are also all branch of the Jews, but any akhbar, any khabar, not ahkam, because their ahkam do not apply to us, but any khabar, any news, historical events, many historical events, which we have taken from the Banu Israel or non-Islamic sources, can that also be a source of tafsir, of understanding the Quran? Now, in here there's one extreme where people just take everything and some just reject everything. We have to understand it a bit. So when we say tafsir al-Quran bil-Israeeliyyaat, it doesn't mean we say, oh, the tafsir, this Quranic verse means this because it's mentioned this in the Bible or this in the Torah or whatever. It just means here that some historical events mentioned in the Torah, mentioned in the Bible, or mentioned from the Banu Israel, which are now preserved in our books, if they help us, give us some historical context of the events, the scenario that took place, with certain conditions, it can be mentioned without being 100%. So for example, there's three different levels. Okay, some things from the Israeeliyyaat, ma huwa sidqun yaqinan, which is definitely true. Why is it definitely true? Because it's also mentioned in the Quran. It's also mentioned in Sunnah Sahiha. So technically speaking, we don't even need these kind of Israeeliyyaat, do we? Because it's already mentioned in the Quran, so the Quran is ahsan, so we don't need to take it by Israel. If it's mentioned in the Hadith, we don't need to take it because it's already mentioned in the Hadith. So if the Israeeliyyaat mention that, it's okay, so we've already got this information. Do you understand? Are you following me? The second thing is, we know for sure that this is yaqinan batil. This is what? Yaqinan batil, because it's against the Quran, it's against the Sunnah, or it is against some fundamental principles of Aqidah and principles that we've understood from Deen. So for example, there are many stories regarding, in their books, regarding Anbiya who have committed sins, who have drunk alcohol, committed zina, betrayed. We said, this is batil yaqinan, because our understanding from the Quran is that the Anbiya are ma'soom. They do not intentionally commit a sin. We've done this in Aqidah, the amana. This is wajib for the Anbiya, that they never intentionally commit a misdeed or a disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the external or internal organs. So with the heart, mind, or body parts. They never intentionally commit a disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Anything that may come across as such is probably a misunderstanding or a human error. Okay? So if there is a narration, so for example, istasawwarul mihrab, the whole story there's many narrations regarding Dawood alayhi salam, and that is, some of them are just absolutely disgusting, we can't even mention it. So we say this is mukhalifun lil-Quran wal ahadith as-sahiha wal musallamat ad-diniyya, those understood principles. So we say this is definitely rejected. Now unfortunately, some of these have found their way into tafsir books. Maybe they were narrated just as such, and then some people, they just narrate everything that they read, they narrate everything that they hear. So some of these have crept, a lot of these have crept into our books of tafsir. That's why you have to be, obviously this is not the time to go into detail, but you have to, when you start doing tafsir, you have to know who are the scholars, or who the early tabi'un or tabu tabi'in, who narrate the Israeeliyyaat. So when we see the narrations, we come to know, okay, this person is known for narrating from the Banu Israel. So his narration, we take it with a pinch of salt, that is even though it's mentioned there without the Israeliyyaat, but it's possibly from the Banu Israel, etc., etc. For Kab al-Ahbar, Wahb ibn Munabbih, Ibn Jurayj, I think those three are commonly known to narrate Israeliyyaat. Okay, and then others narrate from them. After that, we have those which يحتمل الصدق والكذب. We don't know, it's just nothing's wrong with it, nothing's right with it. We have no evidence to say it's wrong or it's right. So regarding this, we do tawaqquf. And an easy example of this for us would be, for example, the Banu Israel, Surah Bani Israel. At the beginning, فَجَاسُوا خِلَالَ الدِّيَارِ, that they were invaded and then they were expelled, they were taken from Baytul Maqdis back to Babylon, and then from there, so none of this is mentioned in our history. Now this is given us historical context of when the conquest, when there was the I think, what do you call it here, the English names, the first destruction of the temple, the second destruction of the temple, when the Banu Israel were taken back as slaves and prisoners to Babylon, and they came back. So none of this is mentioned in our Islamic literature. It's not in Hadith, it's not from the Salaf. And where we have earlier Tabi'un, Tabu Tabi'in mentioned in this is far from the Banu Israel. Now this gives historical context to what happened to the Banu Israel in that era. So something like this, can we say, well, this is what they narrate and it matches with the Quran, so it is possible. It is not against the Quran, it fits with the chronology mentioned in the Quran. So things like this can be taken, but you have to be very careful and critical and be wary of the Israeliyyaat which have crept into our books of tafsir. So if it is exactly what the Quran has said in the Hadith, we don't even need this. If it is against the Quran and the Hadith, and it's also against al-Musallamat, the fundamental principles of our faith. And one such example, a common thing is Ismatul Anbiya. They mention that Anbiya have done certain evil and wrong, and straight away we know this is ludicrous. Then we have certain things which are يحتمل الكذب والصدق. It can be true, it can be false. So then here you can narrate it, as long as it doesn't bring about any major issues. We can narrate it to give historical perspective to certain facts. Okay? Which are already mentioned in the Quran and Sunnah. Are you following? So this is how we have to approach and understand the Israeliyyaat. So it's not an all-in that anything you take from there, because obviously these books are, the preservation hasn't been the same level as the Quran and Hadith. There's this tahrif lafzi, there's tahrif ma'nawi, there's different ikhlaf regarding even a tahrif. Yes? That's something we'll study later on. So even then, that's the Torah and the Injil. And then apart from that, the oral tradition that they have. So things from there, some of them are way out. Some of them can be taken with historical possibilities, which can give us a more understanding of certain verses and themes of the Quran. Okay? So now, that's the end of our second section. So now we've looked now at the sources of tafsir, where we get our tafsir from. And there is nothing else we get our tafsir from. Yes? Everything else can assist, can give us more information, maybe from psychology, something from maths, maybe. They can all add flavor. But the main understanding of the verse, what the verse is telling us, what ahkam we derive, what rulings we derive, what information we gain, what it means, what it tells us, what our aqaid and ahkam are based upon, is just this. With the Quran explains the Quran, a hadith explains the Quran, the Salaf have mentioned it, and this is also ijtihad and ra'i, but the ijtihad and ra'i is above ours. Then we have aqwalus salaf, which is that one mentioned. Then we use lugha. Yes? But you have to remember that this is the least mentioned. Yes, this is rare. This is rare. You get these clarification, but the most common form of tafsir is this, which is aqwalus salaf, which is based on lugha, and then mutaakhirun using lugha. So this is the majority of our tafsir is based upon this. Okay, and the reason is that this is how many things are not transmitted, because they probably thought, well, the Sahaba probably thought that this is, you understand automatically, don't explain this, it's obvious. It was obvious for them and not be obvious for later on. So the essence and the tools are there, which is via the lugha, and we can understand. But Sunnah, some verses have been explained by the Prophet ﷺ, and then later on, using the lugha, the Salaf have meant then the ijtihad, and Mutaakhirun have done the ijtihad, as long as they ijtihad within the lugha. And there's some Israeliyyaat which helps us, give us chronology, give us more detail of certain events mentioned within the Quran, and is acceptable, meaning we can take them with a pinch of salt, not saying this is the ultimate truth or the facts, but this is possible that it helps us understand context mentioned within the Quran, as long as it does not go against the Quran, the Hadith, and does not go against the musallamat of Aqidah and our faith. Understood? Yes? So we stop here today, inshallah. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika, wa nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, wa nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.